Hello! In this tutorial I'll teach you how to create a page that communicates with a third-party service through REST and then get that data and show that correspondent data of that third-party microservice. So first thing to do is log in our framework. In the advanced workspace select my first project, and as we can see we have here some default files that come with the installation, which is the page, some default templates and no logic. Okay, so first thing to do is to click in the indexed file, in the indexed page, or create another page and install a template because we don't have any template installed yet. Select install template. The idea of this tutorial is to show you how can we communicate with the third-party service through REST and show that data in this region here. So first thing to do is to open the main settings, go to the resource and create a new resource that will communicate with that third-party service. So let's click here, add action. Let's choose here a new action called call REST connector, and in here let's put the URL of our third-party systems. So I already have here some default URLs that I can use. I'll just copy paste, and first of all, before we continue, let's open a new tab here to be sure that this URL works. So I have here an extension that basically converts this REST service, which apparently it is a JSON format, it converts into a real JSON viewer if the JSON format it is correct. So let's do that check first to be sure that everything is fine, and it converted correctly, so that means that this is a valid JSON data. So let's go back to our framework and let's continue. So just because we open here the REST URL doesn't mean that the framework can connect it and can get the same data. So first thing to do is to put here the URL and select the return of the return type of this task, of this activity, to a context text. So we don't want yet to parse this result into a JSON. So we want just to return this as a text. And first part is done. So let's just give here a name to this resource, which we'll call users. And now in here, let's drag and drop HTML block, and let's select that HTML block, where in here we will load in the load resources that new resource that we created, which was the users. We want this to be loaded on page load, correct, and the load that we want to call, it will be the load field resource. Additionally, because this will returned text in the display resource attributes, we need to add a space in here. Why? Because basically this resource, it return a text, it will not return an object. So basically, to display, usually this is used to display an attribute inside of an object. So if the the resource, if it is a text and if it is not an object, so we need to put here a space so we can understand that it will show this resource as a text in here. Okay, so done. So we can save and we can preview our page. Okay, voila. Okay, first thing to do, or first thing that we have here is we can see that we have a message. Probably that was what the third-party server returned. So basically it's saying that we cannot access to that REST URL because it's missing this header here. So we need to create, when we call that specific URL, that specific REST URL, we need to pass the user agents. So let's go back to our framework, to our resource, and now let's add here in this symbol, let's add here HTTP header. So let's click here other settings and let's add here HTTP header, which is here. Okay, and now let's put here user agents, colon, space, and then let's put here a specific user agent called like Mozilla, whatever. I think just like that it should work fine. So let's save and let's refresh to see if now we get the JSON. Okay, perfect. Now we are getting the JSON. Perfect. So now what we want to do is to go back to our framework, to this task here, and return this into a content JSON. Okay, so now we know that the users now it is an object or an array which will contain this structure here. Perfect. Okay, so first part is done. Now what do we want to do next? So what we want to do is this div here, we can basically just delete it, and let's create our interface to load that resource that we created. So how can we do that? So let's just create here another HTML block. Let's put here show users, something like that, and in here we can just drag a table where we're gonna put one line with 3 columns, something like that. So it will show the login, the ID, and the node ID, something like that. Okay, so in here, in the table, we select the table. In the properties of the table, let's add some ads, and let's add 3 columns, where in here we want to show the ID. In here I want to show the login, and in here I can show the node ID, something like that. And now in here, in the display resource attribute, in here I want to show the ID. In here I want to show the login ID. It's the login ID? No, it's the login. And in here I want to show the node's ID. Now additionally, in the table, when this table loads, I want this to load the user resource, and I want to select this handler load list table and tree resource. Okay, so just by doing this, basically it will show me a table with these fields here, where the idea is to replicate this line here for each individual of these objects. So we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. So basically we have a bunch of objects, and for each of them I want to show the login, the ID, and the node ID. So basically you should replicate this line for each individual object. But there is a step that we didn't do, which is we need to tell to the system what is the line, the row of the table that he should replicate for each object. So basically we need to select the row, which we came here, we select the row, the table row. This is one way of doing. So I select the table column, and I go here and I put select parents, and automatically select the table row. Or I go to my layers, and in here I select the table row. It's exactly the same thing. And then I go to the properties of my table row, and I scroll down, and in the widget properties I will select a type of the widget, which needs to be this type here, row item. And after I select this, the system will understand that it needs to replicate this row for each individual object of the specific resource that it is being loaded in the table, which was the users, as we can see here. Okay, so we can save and we can test the page by doing refresh, and voila, here it is. Very simple. Basically what we did was to communicate through here, creating a resource, calling this type, call REST connector, passing the URL. In this specific case of this URL, we needed to add a specific HTTP header, and then convert that URL to JSON, put that in a resource called users, and then show that, then create our own layout, basically just drag and dropping a table, asking the table to load that specific resource that we created, which was the users, and then create our table saying that this line here is that a specific type of the rows, it's this type here, which is the row item type widget, saying to the, which tells basically to the system that he needs to replicate this line for each individual object or item inside of this resource here, the users. And voila, here it is. So this is one way of doing this, very simple. If you want another way, let's just create here another resource. which basically it's a little bit different resource. So basically we have here this resource here, where basically we can open this other resource here, where basically it's a JSON too, but if we convert this JSON to an object, basically it has these 4 properties, and inside of the products then we have an array with multiple different objects. So what we want to do is we want to make a request for this JSON and only show the products in a table too. But in the other JSON we had that in the roots of the JSON. In here we don't have. So what we need to do is very simple. Let's create a new resource which will be called REST connector. So in here we copy paste the URL that we use too, and in here first thing to do is to see if we can return as a contact text, and we give a name for that specific resource called products, and in here we can draw our interface by dragging and dropping another div here, and in here in this div let's just do the load. In the load resources, let's just load the products resource to see if we can get the URL first. So let's put a space, let's do refresh. Okay, and voila. Okay, in this case we can get the URL, perfect. So next step is we can delete this guy here, doesn't really matter, and we can change now the products to be JSON content. Okay, perfect, the JSON content. And now what we can do is we can simply get this here and start building our own table. Here can be 3, 2, the same thing. Where in here let's select our table. Our table, we want it to load the products. We want to add some ads, where in here it will load. We have the ID, the title and description. So ID, title, description, something like that. And here we want it to show the ID, and here the title, and here the description. We are just showing three columns, but we could show all these columns here. I'm just doing this so you can understand an example. Okay, so this is done. Okay, so we need to select now the parent, which is a row, and we need to put this as a type, row item type. Okay, and now if we save this, nothing will happen. As you can see, it's not showing anything here because we need now to add. So the products, it is returning this object here, so we just want to be the product. So what we need to do is to create here another action, which basically will be a result from a variable, where in here will be what we want to do is the variable, we want it to be an existing variable, which will be the products, and inside of the products we have the products here. So we just need to update and in here put product. So basically what this will do is in here creates the variable products with this object here, and then we are getting the products key, this key, what is inside. So it will be an array, this array, and we are putting again inside of the same variable, so overwriting the previous value. So if we save this now and if we refresh the page, it shows already the corresponding information. So this is an example of the things that you can do through REST. Another example is we have here another JSON URL, which basically this JSON URL it doesn't return a list of objects, but it returns an object itself. And let's say that I want to show this object itself. So what we need to do is the same thing. We need to create here a new resource, which will be call REST connector. Let's put here the correspondent URL. Let's put here the name of the product. This will be return to JSON. So we'll skip the step to be sure that the system can get that specific URL, because I tested this before and I know that it can, so let's just skip that step. So basically we put this specific resource in a product, okay, in a resource called product, and now in here I can just drag and drop another div here and another div here inside and another one here, where basically this will call, we can put title and phone, where in here will be title, and basically the resource will load we want, when this div gets drawn, we want this to load the product resource on page load with the handler load field resource, and the display resource attributes in here will be the title, and I want this to append, I want, instead of replacing what is inside of here, I want it to append the title to this string here. Okay, and in here I do something very similar, which in the load resource it will load the product the same way, and in here it will be the description, and in this case it will replace the content. So I can put here something and automatically it will replace. So I could put something like saying error cannot get product data. If the system, if the framework connects with the REST, and then it will replace this string, otherwise it will show by default this error, something like that. Or I could put something like loading getting product data, something like that. And if we save, automatically when we refresh this, it will show these other fields in here. So the title iPhone 9, as you can see, iPhone 9, and in here the description is not working. Okay, so description. So what have we done wrong? Okay, it's missing here the handler. Okay. So if we refresh now and scroll down, here it is. It replaced that message that we put before, which was the loading. It's replaced by the corresponding description, which was this description here. Very good. So basically this is like multiple different ways that I'm showing you to get third-party services and using the data of that specific services. Another way of doing this is, instead of loading the product resource in each of these individual divs, what we could do is, in this parent div here, we could load, in the load resource, we could load the product on page load, where in here in the load handler we choose load element fields resource, and in each individual of them we can just erase the resource that we loaded. It's exactly the same action, but the difference is that instead of loading the product resource in each individual of these divs, we just do it once in the parent, and then in each individual ones I just show here the title, and in here I just show here the description. It's exactly the same action. So if we save this and if we refresh the page, it will show exactly the same information. And voila, here it is, the title and the corresponding description, the title and the corresponding description. This is just another way of showing the fields or the properties or the attributes of a specific object into our canvas editor. in case you want to have a combo box, let's just drag another div here so I can show you. In case you want to have like a combo box, a drop down box, and you want this drop down to be loaded based in a third party resource, we can do that too. So basically I have here a JSON, which basically it returns an array with a bunch of data, and I want to display this in a combo box. So how can I do that? So first thing is to create a new resource of type REST, where I just copy paste this specific URL here, and this will be, the type will be returned in JSON too. It could be, we have other types like XML. In this case, these third-party services are returning in JSONs, in the JSON format. And in here I just put basically the name of the resource, categories, and then in here in the drop down I do exactly the same thing, which is in the resource, in the load resource, I choose the categories resource, on page load. I want this to load the handler load field resource, and by default it will load all the elements in here. Let's save and let's see if it works. So if we refresh, let's scroll down, and in here, voila, I have all these correspondent fields in here. So basically this is like different ways of using third-party microservices through REST with JSON format. In this case, for the sake of this tutorial, we're just using JSON, but we could have used XML too. Basically, and use them to show a list of objects. In this case, this REST, we couldn't just call that REST service just by putting the URL, so we needed to add a user agent, as we could see before. Then in the second, we could simply call the URL directly, but instead of calling the URL directly, we needed then to call the products key inside of the return JSON, because it was not a list directly. Then in the second, it was returning an object that basically we showed some elements of that specific object. And in the fourth example, I show you a REST that returns a list, a very simple list of a very simple array with values, and we are using that values to choose or to create a combo box. So for examples, very simple. Now we have done this, all of these, we have done this through the the page editor. Now it will be much better if we could have done this through the logic, like in here. So ideally, all these steps here, instead of doing this through here, I could have done it through the business logic. If we want to have an application architected correctly, that will be our advice, which will be to create these REST services in the business logic. And to do that, we'll do that through low code. I'll show an example. So we do add service manually. So let's put here a name of a service like my REST service. This is just an example, where in here let's add a service, which will be, in this case, we want to have the users, like get users will be our service method name. This is just an example. And in here, what you needed to do is to search the REST connector, which is this one here, drag and drop it here. It opens our properties here, and we needed to put here the URL, which in this case, this one here. We know that this specific one needs to have the user agents. We had tested that before, so I'm just replicating basically the same logic that we have done that before in the previous examples. That's it. Where in here we need to put user agents, where we can put it Chrome, something like that. And we want this to return as a content to JSON. We want to put this in a variable, this variable which will be users connect to REST service. We can save, okay, and first part is done. So we have here our service connecting with a third-party REST service and converting that data into JSON, and then put that in a variable called users. Okay, now we just want to go back to our logic group here and drag and drop the return task and return the variable that we created, which was the users. Save, we just connect them, and voila, we have here our business logic done first. We could create another service called get products. Get products, where in here we'll do the same thing, search for the REST connector, expand this guy here, in here copy paste this URL products, put the products here, return it or convert it to a JSON, put this in a variable called products, save, and return then that variable. Well, as a matter of fact, there is a step missing here between these two, which is we need to create a variable, define local variable in here in the middle, which basically will get that product in this case will be products, and inside of that variable product we want to get the products, which was what we did before. Products, which is products, yeah, products. Okay, perfect. So we have here products, and we want to put this in the same variable than before, which was the name of the variable was products. Okay, perfect. So basically in here we are connect to REST service. In here we are getting products inside of variable products. Basically has the same name. It can be confusing, but just so you can understand. And in here is return products. Return products, something like that. So basically we have two services here basically that we can use now in our page editor. So if we click in the index, instead now of using this user as a call REST connector, we could do it as a call business logic service, where in here we would call that specific service. In here it's the get users. Okay, perfect. And in here it's the same thing. Instead of calling this logic here, we'll call the business logic service, which will be the get products. And in this case we don't need this one anymore, because this one was getting the products inside of products, so we can just erase this guy here. Okay, and we'll leave these two other resources. So if we save, if we refresh, we'll get exactly the same thing. Okay, so we are not getting anything in here. Let's see why. So if we go back to our resource, if we open the products, which was the business logic that we had here, if we click here to edit that business logic, we could have do this through here or directly through here as we did it before. And if we search here in this task here, we misspell here the product. So basically this REST task here, we are connecting with the REST URL and we are putting this in a variable called products, and then in here we are getting the products inside of that variable, but that variable is not correct. So is missing a S in here. So we just need to save and save this guy here, close this, and now if we refresh this, we'll see that it will load the second part. So it will load all the products, and voila. So basically this is like other way, which is doing the things through local instead of doing the things through here, calling the REST connector. I could call a business logic service, and in the business logic service it will have the logic to connect with the third-party system. And then in here I just need to create basically my own layout showing that resources that I created in the page editor. In this case, it's these two resources are the resources that will connect to these two business logic services. And voila, here it is, the results. So this is a very simple example, so you can understand how you can work with REST services. And voila, that's it. Thank you very much.